The waters came without warning, turning the narrow canyon into a churning death trap. And Karga had accepted she would die there, until a human hand grabbed her wrist and hauled her up the cliff face with desperate strength. She coughed water from her lungs, sprawled on the muddy ledge, her entire body shaking from cold and exhaustion. Through blurred vision, she saw her rescuer collapsed beside her, chest heaving, clothes plastered to his lean frame. He was young, perhaps mid-20s, with sun-browned skin and dark hair that hung in wet strands across his forehead. A human. A human had just risked his life to save an orc. Karga pushed herself up on trembling arms, water streaming from her travel-worn leather vest and trousers. Her pack was gone, swept away by the flash flood. Everything she owned lost. But she was alive, and that seemed impossible given the way the water had slammed her against the rocks, pulled her under, filled her mouth and nose until she was certain her journey ended here in this forsaken ravine. "Are you hurt?" the human asked between gasps. His voice was rough but genuine with concern. She stared at him, trying to process the question. Her shoulder throbbed where she had struck stone. Her ribs ached with each breath. But none of that mattered compared to the strangeness of this moment. "Why did you help me?" He sat up slowly, wincing, and she saw blood seeping through a tear in his sleeve. "You were drowning. I am an orc. I noticed." He pressed his hand against the wound on his arm, face tight with pain. Still seemed like drowning was a problem worth addressing. Karga looked down at the water below, still raging through the canyon with murderous force. Debris tumbled past, tree branches and torn vegetation marking the flood's destructive path. If he had not been there, if he had not reached down from this ledge at the exact moment she surfaced near the canyon wall, she would be another piece of debris now, battered and broken. "You are bleeding," she said, the words coming out more curtly than she intended. Orcs were not raised to speak softly, and gratitude felt like a stone lodged in her throat, too large to swallow, too awkward to spit out. "I will manage." He was already tearing a strip from the bottom of his shirt, trying to wrap his arm one-handed with limited success. She watched him struggle for a moment, then moved closer. "Let me." He hesitated, and she saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, fear maybe or just caution. She was larger than him by several inches, her shoulders broader, her arms corded with muscle from years of hard labor and harder travel. Her tusks, though small by orc standards, jutted from her lower jaw. Her skin was the deep green of pine needles, marked with old scars. She looked like what humans expected orcs to look like, dangerous, but he extended his arm. She took the fabric strip and wounded around the gash with practiced efficiency. The cut was deep but clean, probably from a sharp rock during the climb. "This needs proper binding. My camp is not far." Half a mile upstream above the flood line. He studied her face as she worked, and she kept her gaze on the bandage, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "I am Everett Zanderson, Karga." She tied off the bandage, tighter than was probably comfortable, but it would hold. "Where were you going?" "I have a homestead about 10 miles north of here. I was checking trap lines when I heard the water coming." He stood, testing his legs, then looked at the cliff face above them. "We should climb higher before dark. This ledge will not hold if the water rises more." Karga followed his gaze. The cliff was steep but climbable, with enough handholds and outcroppings to make the ascent possible. Her body protested the thought of more climbing, but he was right. The sky still hung heavy with clouds, and rain continued to fall in sporadic bursts. Another surge could sweep even this ledge. They climbed in silence, Everett leading the way despite his injured arm. He moved with the careful confidence of someone accustomed to rough country, finding the best path up the stone face. Karga followed, her larger frame making some of the moves more difficult, but her strength compensating where grace failed her. By the time they reached the top, twilight was settling over the forest. Everett paused to get his bearings, then started walking upstream, keeping well back from the canyon's edge. Karga walked behind him, watching the way he favored his injured arm, the way he limped slightly on his left leg. He had hurt himself saving her. The debt grew heavier with each step. His camp was simple but well made. A small tent, a banked fire under a lean-to shelter, supplies organized in a neat pile covered with oiled canvas. He moved immediately to rebuild the fire, coaxing the coals back to life and adding dry wood from his protected stack. Karga stood at the edge of the firelight, uncertain of her welcome now that the immediate crisis had passed. "Sit," Everett said, not looking up from the fire. "You look like you are about to fall over." She sat, more heavily than she intended, her legs finally giving way to the exhaustion that had been building since the water first hit her. The warmth of the growing fire felt like a blessing, and she held her hands toward it, trying to stop the shivering that had taken hold of her body. Everett produced a blanket from his tent and held it out to her. When she hesitated, he gave her a tired smile. "It is not charity, it is pragmatism. If you catch fever and die, I will have gone to considerable trouble for nothing." She took the blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. The fabric smelled of wood smoke and pine and something else, some scent that was distinctly his. Human. She should find it unpleasant, but she was too tired and cold to care. He retrieved a pot and filled it with water from a canteen, then set it over the fire to heat. From his supplies, he pulled strips of dried meat and hardtack and offered half to Karga. She accepted without speaking, the food dissolving the last of her resistance. She was starving, she realized. She had not eaten since early morning, and the flood had drained whatever reserves she had. They ate in silence, the crackling fire and distant rush of water the only sounds. Karga found herself stealing glances at her rescuer. His face was lean, weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned. But there was something cautious in his expression, a guardedness she recognized. He was alone out here, and he had learned to be careful. "Where were you headed?" he asked finally, pouring hot water into 2 cups and adding what looked like dried herbs. "North, away from the settlements." Karga accepted the cup he offered, inhaling the steam, mint and something else, earthy and soothing. "My clan cast me out 3 months ago. I have been traveling since then." "Cast out for what?" "I refuse to raid a human village." The words came out flat, emotionless, though the memory still burned. "The elders said I was weak, that I had forgotten what it meant to be orc. They gave me until sunset to leave and said if I returned, they would kill me as a traitor." Everett was quiet for a moment, sipping his tea. "That seems harsh. Orc clans do not tolerate softness. We are taught that humans are enemies, that mercy is weakness." She looked into her cup, watching the herbs swirl in the hot water. "But the village they wanted to raid was small, families, children. I could not see the honor in it." "So you walked away from everything?" "Yes." She drank, the tea warming her from the inside. "I thought I could find work in one of the frontier towns, but humans do not trust orcs. I have been turned away from every settlement I approached. Some threw stones. Some set dogs on me. One man shot at me with a crossbow. That explains why you look so surprised that I pulled you out of the water. Most humans would have let me drown, counted it as one less orc to worry about." Everett poked at the fire, sending sparks drifting into the darkness. "My father taught me that a person drowning is just a person drowning. Everything else is noise." He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "For what it is worth, I think you made the right choice. About the village." Karga felt something shift in her chest, some tension she had been carrying since her exile loosening just slightly. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was. He died 2 years ago. Fever took him one winter, quick and mean." Everett set down his cup. "Left me the homestead and about 1,000 things I still do not know how to do properly." "You are alone there." "Yes. My mother passed when I was young. No siblings. It is just me and about 40 acres of stubborn land that does not want to grow much of anything useful." He smiled, but there was loneliness in it. "But it is home, and it is mine." They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence now, more comfortable. The fire burned low, and Everett added more wood than checked his bandage. Blood had seeped through, and Karga could see him trying to ready it one-handed again. "Let me," she said, moving closer. He tensed slightly but allowed it. She unwrapped the soaked fabric and examined the wound in the firelight. "This needs to be cleaned. Do you have spirits?" "In the pack." The brown flask. She found it and returned to his side. "This will hurt." "I assumed as much." She poured the alcohol over the gash, and Everett hissed through his teeth but did not pull away. Karga worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best she could, then tore fresh strips from the ruined blanket and bound his arm properly. Her hands were large and rough, but she had learned field medicine from her clan's healers, back when she still had a clan. "You have done this before," Everett observed. "Orcs fight often. Someone has to patch the survivors back together." She finished the binding and sat back. "You should rest. That arm will be worse tomorrow." "What about you, your shoulder?" She had almost forgotten. The pain had become so constant she had started to ignore it. "It is bruised, nothing broken." "Let me see." Karga hesitated, then pulled aside the collar of her vest to reveal her shoulder. The skin was already darkening with a massive bruise, purple and black against the green. Everett leaned close to examine it, his fingers gentle as he probed the edges. She held herself rigid, hyper-aware of his proximity, the warmth of his breath on her skin. "You are right, nothing broken, but you will be sore for days." He pulled back, retrieving a small tin from his supplies. "This is a salve my father used. It helps with bruising. You do not have to, I know I do not have to, but I am going to anyway." He opened the tin, releasing a sharp, medicinal scent. "Unless you would rather apply it yourself." She could have, should have. But there was something in his manner, a kindness that was not pity, an offering that was not condescension. She had been alone for so long, had been met with so much hostility, that this simple gesture felt overwhelming. "You may." He applied the salve carefully, his touch professional but not cold. Karga stared into the fire, trying to ignore the strange feeling in her stomach. Gratitude, she told herself, just gratitude for his help, nothing more. "There," Everett said, closing the tin. "That should help. Thank you." The words came easier this time. He nodded and moved to the other side of the fire, pulling out a bedroll. "You should sleep in the tent. I will take first watch." "Watch for what?" "Old habits, and the flood might bring scavengers." He spread the bedroll on the ground and sat down. "The tent is dry. You need proper rest." Karga wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. She rose and entered the small tent, finding it cramped but clean, with a thick pallet and more blankets. She removed her wet outer clothes and lay down, wrapping herself in the dry fabric. Through the tent opening, she could see Everett sitting by the fire, his injured arm cradled against his chest, staring into the flames. A human who had saved an orc, who had shared his food and medicine, who asked for nothing in return. In her clan, debts were serious matters. A life debt especially could not be dismissed. If someone saved your life, you owed them everything until that debt was repaid. But Everett had asked for nothing, had not even mentioned debt. Perhaps humans did not see it the same way, but Karga saw it, felt it. a weight settling onto her shoulders heavier than any pack she had ever carried. He had pulled her from the flood and asked for nothing, but that did not mean she owed nothing. Quite the opposite. It meant the debt was hers to define, hers to fulfill. And as sleep finally claimed her, as the sound of rain on canvas and crackling fire faded into darkness, Karga made a decision. She would repay this debt, properly, completely, however long it took. She did not yet know that for an orc woman with nowhere else to go and no one else to turn to, debt could easily mean forever. Morning came with pale light and the smell of cooking. Karga woke disoriented, her body a chorus of aches and pains. For a moment she could not remember where she was, then the previous day rushed back. The flood, the rescue, Everett. She dressed quickly and emerged from the tent to find him crouched by the fire, cooking something in a small pan. He looked up as she approached, offering a tired smile. "Good morning. How is the shoulder?" "Stiff." She rolled it experimentally, wincing, but functional. "That is something." He gestured to the pan. "I have eggs." Well, I had eggs. They were in my pack, which thankfully survived the excitement. Interested. They ate together in the morning light, the forest around them dripping and fresh from the rain. The flood had subsided somewhat, though the canyon still ran high and angry. Karga could see debris scattered across the rocks below, including what might have been part of her pack, too far away and too destroyed to retrieve. "I am heading back to my homestead today," Everett said, cleaning the pan with sand and water. "You are welcome to come with me. At least until you decide what you want to do next." Karga studied him. "Why would you make that offer?" "Because you have nowhere else to go, and I have a place that is far too big for one person." He met her eyes directly. "And because I could use help. The homestead is falling apart faster than I can fix it. I am not asking for charity. I am offering fair trade, work for room and board. You would trust an orc on your land. I would trust the orc who stood up to her entire clan rather than attack innocent people. Yes." He packed away the cooking supplies with efficient movements. "But it is your choice. I can point you toward the nearest town if you would rather try your luck there." Karga thought about the towns, the stones and dogs and crossbow bolts, the fear and hatred in human eyes. Then she thought about the debt she carried, the life she owed. Perhaps this was how she could begin to repay it. "I will come," she said, "until the debt is settled." Everett paused in his packing. "What debt?" "You saved my life." "That is not a transaction. I did not do it expecting payment." "I know. That is what makes it a true debt." Karga stood, testing her legs. They held, though everything protested. "In my clan, a life debt is sacred. You cannot dismiss it just because you do not acknowledge it." He looked like he wanted to argue, then shrugged. "All right. If working off a debt is what makes you comfortable, I will not stop you, but I am paying fair wages even so. I do not need not negotiable. You work, you get paid. Those are my terms." She almost smiled at his stubbornness. "Almost." "Agreed." They broke camp efficiently. Everett clearly practiced at the routine. Karga helped where she could, learning his system, noting how he stored things and organized his gear. By mid-morning, they were walking north through the forest, following a trail that was barely visible but that Everett navigated with easy confidence. The journey took most of the day. They stopped once to rest and eat, sharing the last of Everett's trail supplies. He talked a little about his homestead, warning her that it was rough and needed substantial work. His father had built the original cabin 15 years ago, staking a claim on frontier land that was technically open for settlement, but close enough to orc territories to make most humans nervous. He liked the solitude, Everett explained as they walked. And he said if we treated the land with respect and did not bother anyone, we would be left alone. He was mostly right. We had a few encounters with orc scouts over the years, but my father always met them with courtesy. They never caused trouble. Your father sounds unusual for a human. He was unusual for anyone. My mother used to say he was born in the wrong era, that he should have been an explorer or a monk or something other than a frontier farmer. Everett smiled at the memory, but he loved the land. And he taught me to love it too. They crested a ridge as afternoon was sliding toward evening, and Everett pointed down into a valley. There, home. Karga looked down at the homestead spread below. A cabin, small but solid-looking, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. A barn that had seen better days, leaning slightly to one side. Fenced paddocks, currently empty. Fields that had been cleared for planting but were now overgrown with weeds. A garden plot near the cabin, half wild but still showing signs of cultivation. It was isolated, surrounded by forest, with a stream running along the eastern edge of the property. Beautiful in its way, but also lonely. She could see why Everett struggled to maintain it alone. They descended the ridge and approached the cabin. As they got closer, Karga could see the work that needed doing. Fences with broken rails, loose shingles on the barn roof, the garden overrun with invasive plants. The cabin itself looked sound, but the other structures showed neglect. Everett opened the cabin door and gestured for her to enter. Welcome to the Zanderson homestead. Try not to judge too harshly. The interior was dim but clean. One large room serving as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A loft above, presumably where Everett slept. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking setup that looked well used. Shelves held supplies and tools. Furs and woven blankets added some warmth to the space. It was sparse but comfortable, the home of someone who valued function over decoration. There is a storage room out back, Everett said, moving to light a lamp. It has a cot and space for your things. Not much, but it is private and weatherproof. It is more than I have had in months. He showed her the storage room, which was indeed small but adequate. A narrow bed, a trunk for belongings, a small window that let in light. Karga set down the few possessions she had left, which amounted to the wet clothes she had been wearing and nothing else. I will find you proper clothes, Everett said. My father was not as tall as you, but some of his work clothes might fit well enough. And tomorrow we can assess what needs doing first. That night, they ate a simple meal of stew that Everett made from supplies in his larder. Karga sat at the rough wooden table and watched him move around the kitchen with practiced ease, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot. His injured arm clearly bothered him, but he worked through the pain without complaint. Tell me about what needs doing, Karga said. Everything. Everett laughed, but it was a tired sound. Everything might take a while, I have time. So he told her. The barn needed its roof repaired before winter came, or it would collapse under snow. The fences needed mending in a dozen places. The fields needed to be cleared and prepared for next year's planting. The well needed cleaning. The chimney needed checking for damage. The list went on, each task leading to another. My father maintained this place for years with just my help, Everett said, setting bowls of stew on the table. But he knew every trick, every shortcut. He could fix anything with whatever materials he had. I am still learning, and without him, I am falling behind. Then we will catch you up, Karga said simply. They ate in comfortable silence, and Karga found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months. This place felt safe, removed from the world and its prejudices. Here, she was not an orc and Everett was not a human. They were just two people trying to survive on the frontier. After dinner, Everett showed her around the property by lantern light, pointing out the different areas and explaining what each was meant for. He had plans, she realized. Ideas for expanding, for improving. But plans needed help, and help was something he had not had. They ended the tour at the barn, and Everett climbed up to check the loft, his movements stiff from his injuries. Karga followed, not trusting his balance, and was glad she did when his foot slipped on a weak board. She caught his arm, steadying him, her strength keeping him from falling. "Thank you," he said, slightly breathless. "We are even then. You pulled me from water, I kept you from falling." "The debt is cleared." He looked at her in the lamplight, his expression serious. "That is not how this works, Karga. That is not how any of this works." "Then how does it work?" "We help each other. Because that is what people do. No tallies, no debts, just cooperation." She wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. He truly believed what he was saying, truly lived it, and maybe that was the human way. But she was not human, and she could not so easily dismiss the weight she carried. "I will stay until I have repaid what I owe," she said finally. "However long that takes." Everett seemed like he wanted to argue more, but instead he just nodded. "Then I suppose I should try to give you enough work to last a lifetime." "Why a lifetime?" "Because I suspect that is the only amount of work that would satisfy an orc's sense of debt." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Come on. We both need sleep. Tomorrow we start the impossible task of fixing everything at once." They returned to the cabin, and Karga retreated to her small room. She lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to Everett move around the main room before climbing to his loft. The cabin settled around her, creaking and sighing like a living thing. She had a place to stay, work to do, a debt to repay. It was more than she had hoped for when she left her clan, more than she had any right to expect. But as she drifted towards sleep, she found herself thinking not about debt or work, but about the way Everett had looked at her in the firelight. Not with fear or hatred, but with simple acceptance. As if her green skin and tusks and heritage did not matter. As if she was just Karga and that was enough. It was a dangerous feeling. Comfortable. She would have to be careful not to let it become something more. The days fell into a pattern. They woke with the sun, ate a quick breakfast, then worked until dark. Everett was right about the scope of the work. Everything needed attention, and some tasks were urgent enough that they could not wait. They started with the barn roof. Karga climbed up with supplies while Everett directed from below, his injured arm making the height work too dangerous for him. She tore away the damaged shingles and replaced them with new ones, following his instructions. It was hot, hard work, and by the end of the first day her hands were blistered despite their calluses. Everett noticed and brought out a salve similar to what he had used on her shoulder. "You do not have to push so hard," he said, applying it to her palms. "We have time. The roof needs finishing before the weather turns." "It does, but not at the cost of injuring yourself." He wrapped her hands in clean cloth. "Pace yourself, Karga. This is not a sprint." She nodded, though slowing down felt wrong. She was used to hard work, to pushing through pain. But she was also learning that Everett worked differently. He was methodical, careful, thinking several steps ahead. It was a different approach from what she knew, but she could see the wisdom in it. They finished the barn roof in 3 days. Everett declared it sound enough to survive a harsh winter, and they moved to the next task, mending fences. This work they could do together, and Karga learned the rhythm of it. Everett would identify the damaged sections, and they would work side by side to replace posts and rails. As they worked, they talked. Small things at first. Everett asked about her clan, and she told him about Orcish culture, the warrior traditions, the honor codes that governed their society. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was trying to understand, not just being polite. In turn, he told her about his childhood, about learning to farm from his father, about the loneliness after his father died. He had been engaged once, he said, to a woman from a nearby settlement. But she had decided she did not want frontier life, did not want the isolation. She had left, and he had stayed. "You regret it?" Karga asked as they worked on replacing a particularly stubborn post. "Staying here instead of going with her? No. She made the right choice for herself, and I made the right choice for me. We wanted different things." He hammered the post into place, testing its stability. "But I will not lie and say it did not hurt. Being chosen over is never easy." Karga understood that feeling better than she wanted to admit. "My clan chose their traditions over me, over what was right. I know what it feels like to be found wanting. You were not wanting. Your clan was." She looked at him, surprised by the vehemence in his voice. "You are very certain about that?" "I am. Standing up for what you believe even when it costs you everything. That is not weakness. That is the opposite." He met her eyes. "Your clan was wrong to cast you out, and their loss is my gain." Her heart did something complicated in her chest, and she turned back to the fence to hide her reaction. "You barely know me. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met. I know you are honest and direct. I know you saved me from falling in the barn, and you did not have to do that." He moved to the next damaged section. "I know enough." They worked in silence after that, but it was a charged silence, full of things neither of them was saying. Karga felt off balance, uncertain. She had not expected kindness from Everett, and she certainly had not expected to enjoy his company. But she did. More than was probably wise. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The homestead slowly transformed under their combined efforts. The fences stood straight and strong. The garden was cleared and replanted with late-season vegetables. They cleaned the well, repaired the chicken coop, and patched the cabin's roof where it had developed a small leak. Everett's arm healed, though it left a scar. Karga's shoulder stopped aching. The blisters on her hands hardened into new calluses. They fell into an easy partnership, each learning the other's strengths and weaknesses, adapting their work to complement each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Everett said, "I need to make a trip to town in a few days. We need supplies for winter. Nails, salt, flour, things I cannot make or grow." Karga tensed. "I should stay here." "I thought you might say that." He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "The town is 2 days' travel. I will be gone almost a week. Will you be all right here alone?" "I will be fine." "It is you I worry about, traveling injured and alone." "My arm is healed." "Not completely," he smiled. "Worried about me, Karga? You are my—" She stopped, uncertain what word to use. Employer, friend? The human she owed a life debt. None of them felt quite right. "You are important to this homestead. If something happened to you, all this work would be wasted. Of course, practical concerns." But his smile did not fade. "I will be careful, and when I get back, we can start preparing the fields for winter." The next few days passed quickly. Everett prepared for his journey, making lists and checking supplies. Karga continued working, focusing on tasks she could do alone. She split wood for winter, stacking it neatly beside the cabin. She repaired tools that had been neglected. She reinforced a weak section of the barn wall. The morning Everett left, she stood on the porch and watched him prepare his horse, a sturdy mare named Willow who had been pastured in the forest during the flood. He loaded saddlebags and secured his traveling gear with practiced efficiency. "Remember to bank the fire at night," he said, checking the straps one more time. "And if anyone comes by, you do not have to interact with them. You can stay out of sight. I can handle myself, Everett. I know you can, but I also know how people can be." He mounted Willow, settling into the saddle. "I will be back before the week is out. Be safe. You too." She watched him ride down the trail until the forest swallowed him, then turned back to the cabin. It felt strange being there alone. Over the past weeks, she had grown accustomed to Everett's presence, his quiet humming as he worked, his occasional questions, his easy companionship. The homestead felt empty without him. Karga threw herself into work, trying to ignore the loneliness. She repaired every tool until they gleamed. She reorganized the barn. She even attempted to cook something more complicated than stew, though the results were mixed at best. 3 days passed. Then 4. On the 5th day, as Karga was reinforcing the chicken coop, she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. She straightened, her hand instinctively moving to the axe she had been using. 3 riders emerged from the forest trail. Human men, armed with swords and bows. They wore mismatched armor and had the hard look of mercenaries or bandits. They reined in when they saw her, their expressions shifting from surprise to hostility. "Well now," the lead rider said, his hand dropping to his sword. "What do we have here? An orc squatting on human land." Karga set down the axe carefully, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. "This land belongs to Everett Zanderson. I work for him." "That's so," the second rider, a scarred man with cold eyes, looked around the property. "Do not see this Everett anywhere, just you. He is traveling. He will return soon, convenient." The third rider, younger but no less dangerous looking, moved his horse closer. "I think you are lying, orc. I think you killed whoever lived here and took over. That is what your kind does, right? I have killed no one. I am a worker here, nothing more." The lead rider dismounted and the others followed. They spread out slightly, flanking her. Karga recognized the tactic. They were preparing for violence. Her muscles tensed, but she forced herself to remain still. Fighting would only confirm their prejudices. "We have had reports of orc raiders in this area," the lead man said, walking closer. "Properties burned, people killed, and here you are, alone on a frontier homestead. You can see how that looks suspicious." "I am no raider. I was cast out of my clan months ago. Everett gave me work and shelter." "That is all." "Everett give you this too?" The scarred man had moved to the cabin porch, examining Everett's tools and supplies. "Nice setup. Bet an orc could live comfortable here. Do not touch those things. They are not mine. Not planning to steal, orc, just looking." But his tone made it clear he was considering exactly that. Karga calculated her options. 3 armed men. She was stronger than any of them individually, but 3 at once, with weapons, was poor odds. And if she fought, even in self-defense, it would confirm everything they believed about orcs. But if she did nothing, they might decide to deal with the orc problem permanently. "Look," she said, keeping her voice level. "I understand your suspicion, but I am telling the truth. Everett Zanderson owns this land. He will be back in a day or 2. You can wait and speak with him if you doubt me." "Wait around so you can ambush us, not likely." The young one was fingering his bow, looking eager. The lead man held up a hand, considering. For a moment, Karga thought he might actually listen to reason. Then his expression hardened. "No. I think we solve the orc problem now, before this Everett fellow comes back to find his homestead burned and his supplies stolen." They drew their weapons. Karga did not want to fight, did not want to prove them right about orc violence. But she also was not going to die quietly to spare their feelings. She grabbed the axe and backed toward the cabin, putting her back to the wall. "Last warning," she said. "Leave now. When Everett returns, we will forget this happened. Kill the greenskin," the lead man ordered. They attacked together, coordinated and efficient. Karga used the axe to deflect the first sword strike, then kicked out, catching the young one in the chest and sending him sprawling. The scarred man swung at her from the side, and she barely dodged, feeling the blade whistle past her ribs. She fought defensively, using the cabin as cover, trying not to inflict lethal damage. But they were pushing her hard, and she could feel her control slipping. The lead man scored a cut across her forearm. The scarred one nearly took her head off with a wild swing. Then hoofbeats thundered into the clearing and Everett's voice rang out. "Stop! Stop right now!" The men froze, turning to see Everett sliding off Willow, his face furious. He strode toward them with no apparent fear, positioning himself between Karga and the attackers. "What in the hells do you think you are doing on my property?" The lead man sheathed his sword, looking uncertain now. "We had reports of orc raiders, Zanderson. Found this one on your land claiming to work for you. She does work for me. She has been helping me maintain this homestead for the past month." Everett's voice was cold in a way Karga had never heard before. "And you just attacked my employee, damaged my property, and threatened violence on my land. Start talking before I decide to file a complaint with the territorial magistrate. You were just leaving. Now." Everett did not raise his voice, but there was steel in it. "And if I ever catch you on my property again without invitation, I will not be as generous." The three men exchanged glances, then began backing toward their horses. The lead one tried to salvage some dignity. "You are making a mistake, Zanderson, trusting an orc. The only mistake made today was yours. Now get out." They mounted and rode off, casting dark looks back at Karga. When they were gone, Everett turned to her, his expression shifting from anger to concern. "Are you hurt?" "A scratch." She held up her bleeding forearm. "Nothing serious. Let me see." He took her arm gently, examining the cut. "This needs cleaning. Come inside." In the cabin, he cleaned and bound the wound with the same careful attention he had shown that first night. Karga sat quietly, processing what had happened. He had defended her, had stood between her and violence without hesitation, had risked his own safety for an orc worker. "You should not have done that," she said finally. "Done what?" "Defended me. Put yourself at risk. If they had attacked you, they would not have. They are bullies and opportunists, not murderers. They only attacked you because they thought they could get away with it." He tied off the bandage. "But you are right that this is a problem. If they spread word that I am harboring an orc, others might come, less cautious ones. Then I should leave." "No." The word came out sharp, definitive. "You should not leave. This is your home now if you want it to be." Karga stared at him. "Your home." "Our home. You have worked as hard as I have to maintain it. You have earned a place here." He met her eyes. "Unless you want to leave, that is your choice. But do not leave because of them." She should leave. It was the smart thing, the safe thing. Her presence here put him at risk. But looking at Everett, seeing the determination in his face, she found she did not want to go. Against all sense, against all her instincts for self-preservation, she wanted to stay. "I will stay," she said quietly. "For now." "Good." He smiled, and the warmth returned to his expression. "Because I bought enough winter supplies for two, and it would be a shame to waste them." That night, they ate together as usual, but something had shifted. Everett told her about his trip to town, the people he had seen, the supplies he had purchased. But he also talked about how he had rushed the last day of travel, worried about leaving her alone for so long, how he had pushed Willow hard to get back. "I kept thinking about those reports of raiders," he admitted. "Kept worrying that something might happen while I was gone. I can protect myself, I know, but I still worried." He looked down at his plate. "I have gotten used to having you here, Karga. The homestead feels empty without you, wrong somehow." Her heart did that complicated thing again, the sensation she had been trying to ignore for weeks. "I feel the same, about being here." They looked at each other across the table, and the air between them felt charged, full of possibility. Everett opened his mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he just smiled and went back to his meal, but Karga felt it. The shift, the change in what was happening between them, and it terrified her because she knew where this path led. She was an orc. He was a human. Nothing good could come from feelings that crossed those boundaries, yet she could not bring herself to leave. Could not bring herself to walk away from this place, this man, this strange sense of belonging she had found, so she stayed, and tried not to think too hard about what that meant. Autumn deepened into early winter. The first snows came, light dustings that melted by midday. Everett and Karga worked to prepare the homestead, securing everything that needed securing, storing supplies, making sure the animals they had acquired would survive the cold months ahead. They had added chickens and a goat to the property, purchased with money from the sale of furs Everett had trapped. The animals gave the homestead more life, and Karga found herself enjoying caring for them. The goat, a stubborn creature named Thistle, seemed particularly fond of her, following her around the property and bleating for attention. "She likes you," Everett observed one morning, watching Karga scratch between Thistle's horns. "Animals do not judge based on skin color. Neither do I." Karga looked up at him, standing in the barn doorway with the morning light behind him. "I know, but you are unusual. So are you." He came closer, leaning against the stall. "Karga, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Do you ever regret it, standing up to your clan? You lost everything." She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "I regret the loss. I miss my sister, some of the others, but I do not regret the choice. They wanted me to be something I am not, to value violence over justice." She stood, brushing hay from her clothes. "If I had raided that village, I would have lost myself. At least this way I am still me. For what it is worth, I am glad you made the choice you did. Otherwise, we never would have met. You would have been spared the trouble of having an orc on your property. You are not trouble." "You are," he paused, seeming to struggle for words. "You are the best thing that has happened to this place in years. To me, in years." The air between them felt suddenly thick. Karga's heart was racing, and she did not understand why a simple statement could affect her so strongly. "Everett." "I am sorry. I should not have said that. It is not fair to you." He turned to go. "Wait." She caught his arm, stopping him. "Why is it not fair? Because you are here repaying a debt. Because you might feel obligated to accept attention you do not want. And if I do want it." He turned back slowly, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Do you?" She should say no, should maintain distance, should remember all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. But she was tired of running from her own feelings, tired of pretending she did not care about this human who had shown her more kindness than her own clan ever had. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Everett reached up tentatively and touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "I have wanted to do this for weeks, but I did not want to presume, did not want to make you uncomfortable." "You do not make me uncomfortable. You make me feel safe." She covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "You make me feel like I belong somewhere. You do belong. Here. With me." He stepped closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face. "If you want that, I do. But Everett, this will be complicated. People will not understand. They will say terrible things. Let them say what they want." I stopped caring what narrow-minded people think when I decided to stay on this frontier alone. He smiled, that warm expression she had come to cherish. "I care about you, Karga. I think I have since the moment you grabbed my wrist to keep me from falling in the barn, maybe before that. I care about you too, more than I should, more than is wise. Then we will be unwise together." He kissed her then, gentle and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Karga did not pull away. She leaned into the kiss, her hand sliding to the back of his neck, pulling him closer. He tasted like the mint tea he drank every morning, and his lips were soft against hers. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. Everett rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that for so long. Why did you wait?" Because I wanted to be sure. Sure you wanted it too. Sure I was not taking advantage. He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. Karga, I know you feel you owe me a debt. But I need you to know that what is happening between us, has nothing to do with that. If you want to leave tomorrow, you can. You do not owe me your presence or your affection. I know. And that is exactly why I want to stay. She kissed him again, more confidently this time. The debt I feel is not one that can be measured in work or time. It is something deeper. You did not just save my life that day. You saved me, gave me purpose when I had none, gave me a place when I had nowhere. That is not a debt that can be repaid. Then stop trying to repay it. Just be here. With me, I can do that. They stood together in the barn, holding each other, while Thistle bleated indignantly at being ignored and the chickens scratched in the straw. It was not a grand romantic setting, but it felt right. Real. Like everything else between them had been. Winter came in earnest a week later. Heavy snows that buried the homestead and sealed them in their small corner of the world. They worked together to keep the property functioning, breaking ice on the water trough, shoveling paths between buildings, making sure the animals stayed warm and fed. But the evenings were theirs. They sat by the fire, Everett teaching Karga to read from his small collection of books. She learned quickly, her sharp mind grasping the concepts even as she struggled with the unfamiliar letters. In return, she taught him some of her language, the guttural Orcish words that sounded harsh but carried precise meanings. They talked about everything. Their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Everett spoke of his dream to expand the homestead, maybe raise cattle or horses. Karga talked about her sister still with the clan and whether she would ever see her again. You miss her, Everett said one night as snow fell heavy outside. Every day. We were close as children. She did not agree with the elders, but she was not brave enough to stand against them. Karga stared into the fire. I hope she is safe, happy. Maybe someday you will find each other again. Maybe, but even if we do not, I have found something here. Someone. She looked at him. I never expected to be happy after leaving my clan, but I am. With you, I am happy. Everett took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. I am happy too. Happier than I have been since my father died. Maybe happier than I have ever been. They kissed, the firelight dancing around them, the world outside reduced to nothing but falling snow. And for the first time since her exile, Karga felt truly at peace. The winter passed slowly, as frontier winters did. They were snowed in for days at a time, the world reduced to the small circle of their homestead. But rather than feeling trapped, Karga found the isolation peaceful. It was just her and Everett, working together, living together, learning each other. She learned that he hummed while he cooked, that he had a weakness for sweet things, that he talked to the animals when he thought no one was listening. She learned that he slept deeply, but woke at the slightest unusual sound, a habit from years of living alone in dangerous country. She learned that he gave everything his full attention, whether it was repairing a tool or having a conversation, approaching all tasks with the same thoughtful focus. He learned that she was terrible at cooking but excellent at organizing, that she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard, that she sang sometimes while working, old Orcish songs that sounded wild and beautiful. He learned that she was stronger than she looked, capable of moving things he would have needed help with. He learned that she cared deeply, but expressed it through actions rather than words. They settled into a rhythm that felt natural, almost domestic. Mornings were for essential chores. Afternoons for projects and maintenance. Evenings for rest and companionship. And slowly, without either of them explicitly planning it, the cabin became theirs rather than his. Her belongings migrated from the storage room to the main space. She helped him cook, and he helped her raid. They made decisions together about what the homestead needed. When spring finally came, melting the snow and opening up the world again, they worked together to prepare for planting. The fields that had lain fallow were turned and fertilized. They planted vegetables in the garden and grain in the larger field. It was back-breaking work, but they tackled it side by side one afternoon as they were taking a break from planting, sitting on a fallen log and sharing water. Everett said, "I have been thinking about the future. About this place." He gestured at the homestead. "I always planned to build it up and pass it on someday, to a family, but I never really let myself think about the details because I was alone. And now I am not alone, and I find myself thinking about those details a lot." He turned to face her. "Karga, I know we have only been together for a few months. I know this is probably too soon, but I need you to know that I see a future here with you. A real future." Her heart was pounding. "What kind of future?" "The kind where this homestead is ours. Where we build something together that lasts." He took her hand. "I am not asking you to decide anything right now. I just want you to know that when I think about the years ahead, you are in every single one of them." Karga felt emotion welling up, threatening to overwhelm her. "Everett, I am an orc. You are human. Even if we both want a future together, the world might not let us have it. The world does not get a vote. This is our land, our life. We decide how we live it." His grip on her hand tightened. "I understand there will be challenges, but I am willing to face them if you are." She looked at him, this human who had changed everything, who had pulled her from the flood and asked for nothing, who had given her work, shelter, respect, and eventually love, who saw past her green skin and tusks to the person underneath. "I am willing," she said, "to face anything as long as we face it together." He pulled her close, and they sat together on the log, looking out over the fields they would plant together, the future they would build together. It was not going to be easy. There would be resistance, prejudice, possibly violence. But they had each other, and that felt like enough. Summer brought its own challenges. The crops needed constant attention, and the weather was unpredictable. They dealt with pests, drought, and a brief scare when Thistle ate something toxic and needed careful nursing to recover. But they also had visitors. Friendly ones, surprisingly. A neighboring homesteader named Marcus rode by one day, having heard about the orc living on the Zanderson property. Karga braced herself for hostility, but Marcus had come out of curiosity rather than aggression. "I heard stories," Marcus said, accepting a cup of water from Everett. "Wanted to see for myself if they were true." "And now you have seen," Karga said, keeping her tone neutral. Marcus looked her over, taking in her size, her obvious strength, her cautious posture. Then he looked at the homestead, at all the work that had clearly been done. "Looks like Zanderson found himself a hell of a work partner. I work for my keep. I can see that. This place looks better than it has in years." He turned to Everett. "No offense, but you were struggling before. Now you are thriving. Seems like a good partnership." They talked for a while longer, Marcus asking questions about orcish farming techniques, Karga sharing what she knew. When he left, he nodded respectfully to both of them. "You are good neighbors. If you ever need help, my place is about 5 miles east. Do not hesitate to ask." After he left, Karga said, "That went better than expected. Marcus is a good man. He judges people by their actions, not their appearance." Everett smiled. "And after seeing what you have helped accomplish here, he would have to be blind not to respect you." Not all visitors were as accepting. They had 2 more encounters with hostile travelers, both of which ended with Everett firmly ejecting them from his property. But the fact that some humans were willing to look past prejudice gave Karga hope. As summer turned to autumn, they harvested their crops. The yield was good, better than Everett had managed in years. They sold the surplus at the nearest town, Everett handling the transactions while Karga waited with the wagon outside of town. The money they made went into improvements for the homestead and supplies for winter. "Next year will be even better," Everett said on the ride home. "We know what we are doing now, we have a system." "Next year," Karga repeated, liking the sound of it, the assumption that they would be together, still working side by side. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over their fields, Everett said, "Karga, can I ask you something?" "Always." He took a deep breath, looking nervous in a way she had never seen before. "Will you marry me?" Karga stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. "Marry." "I know it is complicated. I know human orc marriages are not recognized in most places, but I do not care about official recognition. I care about you, about us." He pulled out a ring, simple and made of iron. "I made this myself. It is not fancy, but it is honest, like us." She looked at the ring, then at his face, seeing the hope and vulnerability there. "Everett, are you certain marriage is not something that can be easily undone?" "I am more certain about this than anything in my life. You are my partner in every way that matters. I want to make it official, even if the official channels will not acknowledge it. I want you to be my wife." Karga felt tears prick at her eyes, something that rarely happened. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, the iron warm from his hand. Then he kissed her, deep and passionate, and she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. They married themselves the next day in the clearing beside the stream. They had no officiant, no witnesses except the animals and the forest. They spoke vows they had written themselves, promising to stand together to support each other, to build a life that honored them both. Everett promised to see her for who she was, not what others thought she should be. To defend her, support her, and love her without reservation. Karga promised to stay by his side, to share his burdens, to give him the same unwavering loyalty and trust he had shown her. She promised that the debt she had felt was now transformed into something freely given, a choice rather than an obligation. When they finished, Everett produced a second ring, this one for himself. Karga slipped it onto his finger, her hands gentle despite their size and strength. "I love you," she said, the words feeling strange but right in her mouth. "I did not know I could feel this way about anyone, but I do. I love you, Everett Zanderson." "I love you too, Karga Zanderson." He smiled at the name, testing it out. "My wife. My husband." They kissed again, sealing their vows, and when they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. It was not a traditional wedding. It would not be recognized by the territorial authorities. But it was real to them, and that was all that mattered. That night, they celebrated in the cabin, just the two of them. They ate well, drank the bottle of wine Everett had been saving for a special occasion, and made love with a tenderness that spoke of their commitment. And afterward, lying together in the darkness, Karga felt completely at peace. She had lost her clan, her family, everything she had known. But she had found something better, a partner who saw her clearly and loved her anyway, a home they had built together, a future that was theirs to shape. The debt she had once felt so keenly had transformed into something else, not obligation but choice, not burden but gift. She had been pulled from the flood by a man who asked for nothing, and she had decided on her own that debt meant forever. But now she understood that forever was not about repayment. It was about choosing every single day to stay, to build, to love. And that was a debt she was happy to carry for the rest of her life. The seasons continued their cycle, winter giving way to spring, spring to summer. Karga and Everett worked their land, improved their homestead, and carved out a life that was uniquely theirs. They faced challenges, of course. There were always challenges on the frontier. But they faced them together, and that made all the difference. Word spread about the human farmer and his orc wife, and reactions were mixed. Some people were hostile, refusing to trade with them or making threats. But others were curious, or even supportive. Marcus became a regular visitor, often bringing his children to meet Karga and learn about orcish culture. A few other neighbors followed suit, cautiously at first, but warming over time. Karga even received a letter one day, delivered by a traveling merchant. It was from her sister, brief and carefully worded, but full of love and support. She had heard about Karga's new life and wanted her to know that she was proud, that she had made the right choice, that she hoped someday they could see each other again. Karga cried when she read it, and Everett held her while she did. "We will find a way," he promised. "Someday we will visit your sister, or she will visit us. Family should not be kept apart." A year after their marriage, Karga stood in the garden, looking at the vegetables growing in neat rows. The homestead was thriving. The barn was solid, the fences strong, the fields productive. They had added more animals, expanded the living space, made this place truly theirs. Everett came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about? How different my life is from what I expected. How grateful I am for that flood. Grateful for nearly drowning. Grateful for the man who pulled me out." She turned in his arms, facing him. "Grateful for everything that came after. I am grateful, too, for the flood, for your courage, for every moment that led us here." He kissed her forehead. "You know what today is? Wednesday. It is the anniversary of the day I pulled you from the water. 1 year and 3 months since you came into my life." Karga had not been keeping track of days that precisely, but she trusted his accounting. "We should celebrate." "I was thinking the same thing. Maybe take the afternoon off, go to that meadow by the ridge you like so much." "That sounds perfect." They did exactly that, leaving the work for later and hiking to the meadow. It was summer, and wildflowers covered the ground in a riot of color. They sat together on a blanket, eating simple food and watching clouds drift across the blue sky. "You ever regret it?" Karga asked. "Marrying an orc, making things harder for yourself?" "Never, not once." Everett took her hand, his thumb tracing over the iron ring she still wore. "You are the best decision I ever made, the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though I am terrible at cooking." "Even though you are terrible at cooking," he laughed. "Although you are getting better. That stew last week was almost edible." She shoved him playfully, and he fell back on the blanket, pulling her down with him. They wrestled briefly, more play than fight, until they were both breathless and laughing. Then they lay together, looking up at the sky, hands intertwined. "I want this forever," Karga said quietly. "This peace, this happiness. Then we will fight for it, protect it. Make sure nothing takes it away." Everett rolled onto his side, looking at her. "We have built something good here, Karga, something worth defending. Together, always together." They stayed in the meadow until evening, talking and dreaming about the future. They talked about expanding the homestead further, maybe hiring help someday. They talked about the possibility of children, though both acknowledged the uncertainty of whether human-orc couples could have offspring. They talked about growing old together on this land, watching the seasons change year after year. When they finally returned home, the sun was setting behind the western trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The cabin waited for them, solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin gray line. Their home, their sanctuary, their future. As they walked up the path, Karga thought about that day in the flood, how she had accepted death, certain her journey was over. She thought about the moment a human hand grabbed her wrist, refusing to let her go. She thought about all the moments that came after, each one building on the last, creating a life she never could have imagined. She had thought she owed a debt. had believed she needed to repay Everett for saving her life. But over time, she had come to understand that what they had was not about debt. It was about choice, about two people who found each other in unlikely circumstances and decided to build something together. He had pulled her from the flood and asked for nothing. She had decided that debt meant forever. But forever, she now knew, was not a burden. It was a gift. The gift of time shared, of love given freely, of a partnership that would endure whatever challenges came their way. Inside the cabin, Everett lit the lamps while Karga stoked the fire. They moved around each other with practiced ease, two people who had learned each other's rhythms. When the fire was crackling and the lamps were glowing, they sat together at the table, just as they had that first night. "Thank you," Karga said suddenly. Everett looked up from the bread he was slicing. "For what? For pulling me from the flood, for giving me work, for seeing past what I am to who I am, for loving me." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "For everything. You do not have to thank me. I did not do any of it expecting gratitude. I know, but I am grateful anyway, and I want you to know that I do not stay because of debt. I stay because I choose you. Every day I choose you." Everett's expression softened, his eyes bright with emotion. "And I choose you, every day. For the rest of my life." They stood and came together, embracing in the warm light of the cabin. Outside, night fell over the homestead, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. The forest whispered with wind and animal sounds. The stream murmured its endless song. And inside, two people held each other, orc and human, bound not by debt or obligation, but by love freely given and joyfully received. They had found each other against impossible odds, built a life together despite the world's prejudices, and created a home where both could be fully themselves. Karga had been pulled from the flood by a man who asked for nothing. She had decided that debt meant forever. But forever, she now understood, was not about repayment. It was about partnership, about choosing every single day to stay and build and love. And as she stood there in Everett's arms, in the cabin they had made into a home, on the land they had transformed together, Karga knew she had made the right choice. Not because of debt, but because of love. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Forever was not a burden to carry. It was a life to live, and she would live it here with him for all the days they had left. The years passed, each one adding to their shared story. They weathered harsh winters and celebrated bountiful harvests. They defended their home from those who would take it and welcomed those who came in friendship. They grieved losses and celebrated victories, always together, always united. Other homesteaders followed their example, some even forming relationships across species lines. The frontier was slowly changing, becoming a place where old prejudices had less power, where people were judged by their character rather than their race. Karga and Everett had not set out to change the world, but by simply living their lives honestly and openly, they had become a symbol of what was possible. Marcus's children grew up knowing Karga as Aunt Karga, learning from her and playing on the Zanderson homestead. More orc outcasts found their way to the area, drawn by rumors of a place where they might find acceptance. Some stayed, some moved on, but all were welcomed and given what help they needed. The homestead expanded. They built a second barn, dug a new well, and added rooms to the cabin. The property became prosperous, producing more than enough for their needs. But they never forgot where they had started, never took their good fortune for granted. And through it all, through every challenge and triumph, Karga and Everett remained partners. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they always worked through their disagreements with respect and honesty. They learned from each other, grew together, and built a relationship that only deepened with time. On their 10th anniversary, Everett surprised Karga with a gift. It was a carved wooden sign, beautifully crafted with words burned into the surface. Zanderson Homestead, it read. ESD by Everett. Built by Everett and Karga, home to all who come in peace. I am not much for grand gestures, Everett said as they hung the sign at the entrance to their property. But I wanted something that marked this place as ours, that told everyone who we are. Karga traced the letters of her name, emotion welling up as it had so many times over the years. It is perfect. They stood together, looking at the sign, at the homestead beyond it, at the life they had built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. It was everything Karga had never known she wanted, everything she had never dared to dream. She thought about that moment in the flood, the water pulling her under, the certainty of death. She thought about the hand that grabbed hers, refusing to let go. And she thought about every moment that came after, a chain of choices and chances that led to this life, this love, this home. I love you, she said, the words as natural now as breathing. Thank you for saving me. You saved me too, Everett replied, pulling her close. In every way that matters. They stood there together as the sun set over their land, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last. The debt Karga had once felt so keenly had long since transformed into something else entirely. Not obligation, but devotion. Not burden, but blessing. Not debt, but love. He had pulled her from the flood and asked for nothing. She had decided that debt meant forever. And forever, it turned out, was exactly what they got. Their story became legend in the region, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy. But the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend. Two people, different in every way that society cared about, had chosen each other, had built a life together despite every obstacle, had proved that love could cross any boundary if both people were brave enough to try. And every day, as they worked side by side on their homestead, as they faced challenges together and celebrated victories together, as they loved each other through the mundane and the extraordinary, they proved it again. Karga had been pulled from the flood by Everett Zanderson. She had decided that debt meant forever. But what started as obligation had become the greatest choice of her life. And she would choose it again every day for as long as she lived, because forever was not about debt. It was about love. And love, freely given and joyfully received, was the greatest gift of all. Years later, when they were old and gray, when their homestead had become a thriving community of mixed families and species, when the world had changed in ways they could never have imagined, they would sit together on their porch and remember. Remember the flood. Remember the rescue. Remember the first awkward days, the slow building of trust, the moment they realized what they felt was love. And they would look at each other, these two people who should never have met, who should never have fallen in love, who should never have built a life together. They would look at each other and smile, knowing they had defied every expectation, overcome every obstacle, and created something beautiful. Karga had been pulled from the flood. She had been given a second chance at life. And she had used that chance to build something extraordinary with the man who had saved her, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Every single day. Forever. And that made all the difference.